Hi guys, welcome back to my channel Recaps and Reacts with yours truly, me, Sarah. Woo! I know it's been a minute. It's been a while. Um, yeah, but life has happened. You know how it goes. But I'm back, and it also has been a while for Big Mood. So Big Mood recently came out. It actually came out in April. I watched it back in April, had to rewatch it again, take my notes. Um, but yeah, thank you all who watched my first recap video about Big Move, and I thank you for the comments. I really appreciate it. Um, I'm going to try to keep it just as short and sweet for season two, but I felt like there was a lot in season two. Um, so yes, um, if you like what you see, please like, comment, subscribe, all of the above. Yeah, so let's just get into it. So, season two of Big Mood. Uh, so the first season, each episode was named after a stage of bipolar disorder, which I really loved. I thought that was very creative. This season had me thinking a little bit. I was like, what does all this mean? So first episode is called Leagues, but anyway, long story short of it, I was like, this probably has to do something with distance. And AI told me that it does. So I believe each episode is kind of named after the distance of Eddie and Maggie's friendship. So leagues, obviously they're far, far apart. The friendship is non-existent. We find out in the first episode they have not spoken in a year, which is wild. So yeah, but I'll touch on it each episode that I cover as I go along. So anywho, all right. So first episode. It opens with Maggie is having a dream. We find out that she is quite stable. People in her dream and family, they keep telling her and emphasizing that she's the same person. Um, then we see Maggie waking up and she has a routine. So she has to keep to a routine, I guess, to kind of keep the routine going and keep stable. Um, we see her do some yoga, and then we see two pill organizers. We see one for day and one for night, and that will be important later on. But yes, and then she calls her mother. So her mother's worried because she's so far away from her, and Maggie's like, I'm good, like I'm cool. She's in her sane girl era, is what she says. And she mentions that the medication that she's currently taking is not trying to kill her. So if you remember from the first season, she was taking lithium. And essentially, they reveal it later on in a few more episodes that she had lithium poisoning. So that's what was wrong. Maggie mentions that she is a bridesmaid in a wedding. And her mother says, well, have you heard from Eddie? Because Eddie is also supposed to be in this wedding. And she says, no, I haven't spoken to her. And she hasn't RSVP'd. So I guess, probably not coming, we're assuming. And then Maggie tells her mom not to worry. Maggie's mother says that she is worried because this is the first time she's away after her lithium poisoning. So we cut to a scene of the bridesmaids with Maggie and the other bridesmaids. I'm not really going to talk about this scene too much. It is funny, but I'm not really going to talk about the scene too much. Just note that Maggie is a bridesmaid, but she kind of has limited responsibilities because of her mental disorder. I think they're concerned, or the maid of honor is concerned to give her so much responsibility and fear that she may not be able to handle it. But Maggie is trying to emphasize and insist that she's good, she can do it. So yeah. We also find out that the fourth bridesmaid is Eddie, who is not there at the moment. Wink, wink. I guess I gave that away. But Eddie is not there at the moment, but she is the fourth bridesmaid, and no one has heard from her. So I also want to mention too that I mentioned that Maggie has low responsibility as a bridesmaid. They call her actually a junior bridesmaid, and I said that she was emphasizing to the maid of honor that she was like, I'm good, like I'm okay. This is a constant theme through this season, is she is trying to tell people that she is stable, that she's okay. That's basically how the show opened up. She's trying to, just telling her mother, I'm okay, I'm good, don't worry about me, I'm good. Now she's telling the maid of honor, I'm good, you can give me more, I can handle it, I'm stable, I'm okay. So that's a consistent theme throughout this season. So Eddie appears halfway through the first episode. Maggie is obviously shocked because she has not seen Eddie in a year. So, and no one's heard from her. So she's kind of like, she's there. And they look at her and then they all look at Maggie, and Maggie's just like frozen. We find out that Maggie actually was in California for a year. And then Eddie tells Maggie if they could talk. And of course, Maggie's like, absolutely. So they don't talk this episode. They don't have a conversation this episode. Obviously, they're probably going to talk about their friendship and what happened, but they don't talk in this episode. But, they're both bridesmaids. They're trying to prevent a crisis from happening at the wedding, and they kind of fall back in step with one another. And it's kind of like they're, back to friends again. But then all of a sudden, there is another person we're introduced to who is Whitney. So Whitney is Eddie's new bestie. Okay. And yeah, yeah. We're gonna talk about Whitney quite a bit this season. So yeah, I just know. But Whitney gets introduced in this episode. So we cut to Whitney and Eddie having a conversation. And Whitney asks Eddie if she's had the conversation with Maggie yet. And then Eddie says, no, haven't had it yet. And then Whitney tells Eddie, I want to make sure I say this correctly. Whitney tells Eddie that she will feel so much better when she tells Maggie that she cannot have her in her life anymore because she's toxic. And Eddie says she's going to do it, but Eddie seems a little hesitant to do that. So, this first episode, we don't even hear anything else about this wedding throughout the whole episode. I forgot even who's getting married. I don't even think we even see the bride. I don't think. And I don't know if it's the character from the first season, but this episode to me was just a way, obviously, to reintroduce Eddie back into, Maggie's life again. So that's what it was. And also to introduce Whitney too, because she is going to be a person of contention for Maggie mostly, but yes, but we'll obviously go into that a little bit later. So the second episode is titled Fathoms, and this is a metric. And I'm going to look up internet. I mean, excuse me, I'm going to look up really quick what it means. So it is a unit of equal to a length, a unit of length equal to 6 feet using reference to the depth of water. So we have gone from leagues to fathom. And actually, for consistency, let me look up leagues. What is the formal definition of leagues? Leagues is a historical unit of length, generally considered to be about 3 miles or 4.83 kilometers, though its exact value has varied across times and regions. Okay, so, and now we are in episode 2, which is fathoms, a length equal to 6 feet. So we're getting closer, perhaps maybe closing the gap. So, all right, second episode. So after the wedding, Eddie, Maggie, and Whitney, and the other bridesmaids, I forgot their names, but they're all sitting on a bench and they're waiting on a ride to go home. The other two friends, the other two bridesmaids go home, and then it's just Eddie, Maggie, and Whitney. They're having a conversation. We find out Whitney is a light worker. So a light worker explains that this person is put on earth, right? Whitney, actually, this is Whitney's definition, but it is a person who is put on earth to spread light and eradicate darkness. And she is a social media influencer as well. And then while waiting, they see their friend Tony. When Tony sees Maggie, he's like, Are you okay? I heard you got mercury poisoning." And then Maggie says, "No, it's lithium poisoning." And he was like, "You ate batteries?" I thought that was so funny. It was hilarious to me. I thought it was hilarious. Um, anyway, so Tony says that he has a secret show that night. He's a drag queen. And he says that Barbie and Skipper asked him to be a part of the show. And Maggie and Eddie lose it. They're like, oh my gosh, we love Barbie and Skipper. We want to see them. Can we come? Can we come? Can we come? And Tony says, okay, yes, you can. Or, no, excuse me. First, he says no because he's like, I've had so many of my other friends ask me, and absolutely, like, yeah, do you think I'm gonna let some straight women come in? Absolutely not, because his friends are gay, I'm assuming. And so he's like, you think I'm gonna let some straight women come up in here? And Maggie's like, straight-ish. So, anyway, Eddie says like it's been her dream to see these drag queens, Barbie and Skipper, and Tony says, all right, if you can get me this wig from this person, you can come. And so they go off on an adventure to try to get this wig. Sidebar, I loved Tony. I thought he was so cute. I just loved his style. I loved everything that he had on. He had on like this beret, this like spiked collar. And I think it was like a jersey with like a kilt or a skirt or something. But I loved the style. I loved it. So this episode it shows them trying to get the wig for Tony. And I'm not going to go into too many specific details about that, but they do get, they asked to borrow Will's car. So Will was in last season, FYI. And this is the first time Will is seeing Eddie. And Eddie is like, or excuse me, Will is just like in shock because obviously he hasn't heard from Eddie either. And then Eddie mentions that she does not have a phone anymore. That's why no one's been in contact with her or haven't heard from her because she doesn't have a phone anymore. So Whitney tells Maggie that her father passed away when she was 12, and that's how her and Eddie have bonded. So if we remember, last season, Eddie's father has passed away, and Whitney's father has passed away. So that's how they have bonded and created a friendship. And they've been together every day since they met. So throughout this episode, Maggie is trying to convince Eddie that she has changed, that she's not the same person anymore, but it's not really working. I think Eddie's hesitant to accept that. And obviously, I can understand that because, I mean, I don't know how long they've known each other, but it's been for years and it's probably kind of the same routine. And obviously, Eddie has not been there for her healing journey, Maggie's healing journey. So she doesn't really know, but she's like hesitant to accept that Maggie has changed. During this episode, Whitney kind of saves the day, which makes Maggie look bad because Maggie did kind of botch the whole situation on trying to get the wig, but Whitney kind of saved the day. But then, yeah, she botched it again, so that was frustrating to watch as well. But at the end of the episode, we see Cret. Cret, I think, was in the last season as well, and Cret informed them that he is opening a bar. And he's so thankful to see Eddie because remember last season, Eddie, owned or managed the bar that was her father's bar before I think it went out of business or it got sold. I can't remember, guys. I'm so sorry. But anyway, so Cret wants Eddie to be the manager of his new bar. Whitney convinces Eddie to take the job, and she tells Eddie that it is a message from the universe, and these two have something planned right now, but you don't know what it is yet in this episode. Obviously, if you've watched the season, you know what it is, but something's happening, but you just don't know what yet. So at the end of this episode, Will calls Maggie and he's like, there is something about Whitney. And he says when Eddie first got to California, she was texting him for a few days and then she just ghosted. And now he's suspicious that she's showing up with Whitney, and she's some kind of spiritual guru person, and something seems off. Maggie tells him to do some research and get back to him about it, and Will accepts the challenge. And then someone grabs Maggie's phone and throws it across the bar. And I just want to take this time to know what phone Maggie has because in the first episode, the phone drops into the water, submerged in water. Maggie's trying to get some leeches, de-leech the pond on where they're going to have the wedding, and her phone ends up dropping in the pond. Okay, like completely submerged into water, right? So then we cut to this episode. Someone literally gets her phone. They're at the bar at the end of the episode. Someone gets her phone, throws it across the bar, and it slams into the wall. And then I believe it makes another appearance in the third episode, and it looks unscathed. And I'm sitting here, what phone is this? Because I need this phone. Because it didn't look like it had not type not nan one of an OtterBox, no type of protection. So I would like to know what phone that is. Please get back to me on that. All right, so we're moving on to episode 3, which is titled Cubits. So let's look up the definition of cubits. Guys, I have done this before, just so you know, but the notes are on my phone and I'm recording on my phone, so I can't look at that. Cubits. Okay, well there's several definitions for cubits, but no, that is the measurement. But Wikipedia, I mean Google is telling me, or no, this is Bing is telling me that one cubit equals 1.5 foot. So the moral of the story is coming up, the gap is closing between Eddie and Maggie. All right. So All right, so it opens with Maggie doing her routine, her yoga, all that fun stuff. But she's also stalking Whitney's social media page. Maggie's mother calls, and then she asks how Eddie's doing. And then she says she's doing okay, but she hasn't really seen her because she's been busy. Mother can tell that Maggie's a little worried, and she asks if she asks Maggie if she's going to go see Eddie soon, and Maggie says she wants to let her get settled. While Maggie is on the phone with her mother, someone texts her asking her if she can come over, and it's actually Eddie. She's just using someone else's phone because, like I told you, Eddie doesn't have a phone. And of course, Maggie accepts without hesitation, and she takes her medications while she's talking to her mother. But like I mentioned in the last episode, Maggie has a day pill box and a night pill box, and she's not paying attention, and she ends up taking the night pill. So she took a dose of her nightly pills, and she just woke up. So we all know how this is probably fixing to go. But anyway, Maggie goes to see Eddie, and then they're staying at this fabulous apartment. Like Eddie is staying with this fabulous apartment with Whitney, and apparently it's one of Whitney's friends. But Maggie asks if they're able to afford it. And sorry, let me back up. So Maggie goes and sees Eddie, and Eddie and Whitney are staying in this wonderful apartment. And Maggie asks how they're able to afford it. Eddie says, I don't know, but Maggie or Whitney handles our finances. Red flag, red flag, obviously. Girl, how do you not know your money and Whitney is handling y'all's finances? Okay, girl. So Will was on to something, that something don't feel right. Cause I mean, we already could tell that there's something about Whitney that's a little off putting, but that right there, weird behavior. We find out Whitney's out of town, and Eddie says it's Thursday, and it's normally her soul reset day, and she's kind of bummed because Whitney's normally there to help her. And so Eddie asks Maggie if she can do it for her. Maggie says, of course. So this doing the sound bath, or she ends up doing a sound bath, I believe, or the soul reset. Um, this is a way that Maggie can step up for Eddie and be there for her and kind of show that she's changed. So that's important because remember, again, I told you that's going to be a theme for this, or excuse me, for this season. So they're doing the sound bath, and Maggie's getting very sleepy, and she thinks what happened, and she realizes that she accidentally took her medication, her night medication. So she's like, oh my gosh. And she starts to panic. So Eddie gets a call from Crent. Eddie tells Maggie that Crent wants her to go to the bar so she can help him, and which cuts their sound bath sessions short. Ooh, say that 10 times fast. Which cuts their sound bath session short. And Maggie's like, oh, okay, cool, great. We can meet up later. And Eddie's like, well, actually, can you come with me? And then Maggie goes with her, and Maggie is struggling because she's about to fall asleep. And yeah, so another adventure. So they go to the bar that Corinne's opening, and it's a hot mess. But anyway, that's that's another situation. That's like the B plot probably going on. Actually, it's like the A plot. Anyway, it's a plot, but I'm not gonna go into too much detail about the bar. But yeah, it's a mess right now. And Will comes in and he tells Maggie that he found some information um on Whitney. He found out that she used to be a different influencer and she hasn't always been a light worker. So Will says she has an extremely long history with the internet and they need to tell Eddie. Maggie tells Will not today because Eddie's stressed out about this bar and she's like, no, we're not going to say anything. She needs to be her anchor. And Will says that she's concerned that Eddie has given Whitney money and they need to tell Eddie. Um, Maggie hears Eddie coming and shoves Will into the sauna. And this is again Maggie trying to protect Eddie. So it's like she's trying to shield, like she knows Eddie's stressed out about this bar, and she's trying to protect Eddie from any more stress or any more craziness. Eddie ends up finding out that Will is there, and Maggie explains why he's there and that she was going to try to help hide him. Maggie says that Eddie is a woo woo, and that sets Eddie off because she's like, "You see, I knew you weren't. I knew you didn't change. Like I knew you weren't into this, and you're making fun of me. Blah 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 blah." She tells Maggie and Will to get out the bar. So Eddie kicks Will and Maggie out of the bar, and they both leave. And Eddie storms off upset. Also, I just want to say that the bar is not open. They're just trying to open the bar. Because apparently there's going to be like a reporter of some sort is going to come to report on the bar, and it looks a mess. It's not ready and all this other stuff. For Trent, it seems like this is like a passion project for him because he's rich. He's like, I don't care. But Eddie's like, bruh, get it together. So she's stressed out. Trent, Maggie, and Will are all outside. Maggie tells Trent that they're going to turn this stupid mistake into a beautiful triumph. And Maggie saves the day. And so basically, Maggie saving the day. She is trying to set this bar up for success. I don't know where Eddie is within all of this, but they're like trying to do something, make this bar look great for this reporter who's going to come later. And at one point, Maggie is drilling into the wall, and so she's drilling. And remember, I told you that Maggie is exhausted. She's trying to stay awake, and she's drilling and she drills a hole into her hand and there's just blood everywhere. She doesn't seek medical attention when this happens because she needs to be there for Eddie. So she just keeps going. I think she gets a glove and like puts a glove over her hand. And then there's like some uh like cotton balls or something that was supposed to, yeah, and she like pats it with that and then she just keeps moving forward. And this just kind of shows you like the lengths she's willing to go for Eddie, how much she loves Eddie. That girl, you're like bleeding out and you're not even like you're trying like to avert a crisis for Eddie. And yeah, so that's important. Eddie comes back to the bar and the bar looks amazing. She tells Maggie that she thought she was going to come back into chaos, but she really fixed it. And Maggie is really happy, about that she's acknowledged that. You can also tell Maggie's on her last leg. This girl about to just pass out, just go to sleep any minute. And she goes to the restroom and she locks the restroom and she takes a nap. So after more saving the day, I'm not going to go into detail, but Eddie and Maggie finally have a conversation. And Eddie tells Maggie that she has been a great soul anchor today. Then tells her that she felt like she wouldn't accept her anymore on how she is now. Maggie says, "Of course she would accept you," or she's like, "Of course I would." Maggie says, "Of course I would accept you." Eddie tells her that Whitney was concerned that Maggie's chaos would bring her down, but Eddie can tell that Maggie has changed. She says the will has not. And Maggie asks what he did. So we find out here that after Eddie had her abortion last season, Will professed his love to her. And Eddie says that Whitney showed her how toxic that is, or how toxic that was for him to do that. And then she says that Whitney has helped her so much. Eddie tells Maggie that she felt like she's been holding her breath since her father passed away, and now she feels like that she can breathe again. And Maggie takes her hand and says that she really wants to get to know Whitney because her saying that she knows how important Whitney is to Eddie. Eddie tells Maggie that she and Whitney are going to start a intentional community in Devon. And I guess Devon is like hours away from where they live, and Maggie says, well, they're going to make it work. Then Whitney crashes the moment because it seems like they were having a wonderful like bonding moment, and then Whitney comes in and crashes it. And the first thing you notice is Whitney has these big white teeth in her mouth, and Eddie doesn't seem to notice anything. She's like, "Why you look different?" And doesn't notice that she has blaring white teeth in her mouth now. Eddie asks Whitney if she got a facial, and Whitney kind of gets snippy and is like, "Of course not, Eddie. I was trying to secure our future." And then Eddie says, "Oh no, yeah, of course. I'm sorry." And very submissive, weird dynamic. Red flag number three, because number two was what Will had said. Number three is this, and yes, it's weird. It's a weird dynamic because Eddie's like, "I know you worked so hard for us." Okay, so yeah. Anyway, so that was the end of episode 3. Episode 4 is titled Hands. So now maybe like we're hands apart, we're touching. I don't know. But gap is closing. So we episode 4 opens with Maggie is having dinner with her estranged father. And the interaction between her and her father does come off very contentious. Um, So when she sits down with her father, like I said, it's very contentious. And then she excuses herself for a moment and she goes to the restroom. She calls Maggie, or excuse me, Maggie calls Eddie. And of course, Whitney's with her. And Maggie explains that she's having issues with her father. And he doesn't even realize they're estranged. Eddie says that there's like a possible ritual that can bring them closer together, and Eddie asked if Whitney could perform that on them. And Maggie reluctantly accepts that. So Maggie goes back to the table with her father, and they keep bickering, they keep going back and forth. And while they're bickering, there's this younger lady sitting at another table, and she keeps looking at them. And when Maggie turns, like she'll turn away. And um, please, and also note that Maggie's father is also famous. He's an actor. So that could be some things, but also we kind of find out here that he's an alcoholic, or yeah, he's an alcoholic. And as the dinner goes on, Maggie's father puts her down a lot, very passive aggressively. He belittles her career and mentions her weight a little bit, but yeah, very nasty. Just very subtle jabs. Like, oh, I also the lady that I mentioned earlier, that keeps staring at them, Maggie asks her father, she's like, "You know this lady who keeps staring at us?" And he's just like, "No." And she's like, "She looks really familiar." That'll be important for a little later. Maggie's father tells her that he's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award and he wants her to be there. It would mean a lot for him if she were to attend. Maggie's trying to figure out why because he's never included her in anything before. And this seems, he said it's really important, like I said, to him, and that seems to strike a chord in Maggie. So, and I want to also mention, like, we touched on that he's probably an alcoholic. They're doing a lot of drinking. at this dinner, just FYI. We cut to later on in the episode. At this point, Maggie and her father are probably drunk. They seem drunk. They're having a good time, but Whitney texts Maggie that they're on the way and to perform this ritual on her and her father. And Maggie says that tells her father that they're on their way, but she will go to the lifetime achievement thing if he says that he does not want to do this ritual. And Maggie's trying to figure out, or Maggie's father is trying to figure out what is going on. And she tells him the issue. And then Maggie and Whitney come at that moment. Whitney tells Maggie's father that they're going to do a ritual, and he doesn't say anything. He's just kind of serious. He looks serious. And Eddie and Whitney go to set up in like a separate room. Maggie's father says that he is surprised that Maggie's doing this, and says Maggie tells him that it's because Eddie is her best friend. But then some manipulation going on. Maggie's father says no, it's because your best friend has a new shiny toy, which is Whitney, and you're jealous. He's not wrong. And then she says that she needs to have integrity. And he tells her that she has a very sharp mind, but she always disappoints him because she never uses it. And she's constantly wasting her time. And she's a disappointment. So Maggie goes to the restroom after that. And Maggie has a little bit of a breakdown in the restroom because that was a cold reaction or interaction with her father. And she's trying to tell Eddie, but Whitney ends up taking the phone and all this other stuff and is trying to talk to her. And then Maggie like just has a moment. She's like, but I want to talk to you. I want to talk to Eddie. And then they hang up the phone. Maggie goes back to the table, and then her father apologizes. He does mention that he has bipolar disorder. He doesn't come out and say it, but says it like in a roundabout way, saying he has really high highs and really low lows. So we can deduce he probably has bipolar disorder. He says that when one of them was going through something in his generation, they basically got drunk. So that's how they dealt with their problems. He says because of that, he wasn't at home much, but should have been. He tells her that he wants them to have a better relationship. And then he says he will do this ritual that involves a ring stick ceremony thing. And at this moment, Eddie comes out and tells them that she and Whitney are ready and they're set up and they're ready to do the ritual. Maggie says they're not coming. So Maggie gets a little battery in her back because remember what her dad said earlier that he wanted, she's a disappointment to him. And she's a disappointment to him. And she needs to have integrity. So I guess this is the moment for Maggie to shine. So she says they're not going to come and they're not going to do it. And Eddie says that this would really help Whitney. It would help her to gain more followers because of Maggie's father. And this just sets Maggie off. She tells Eddie that Whitney knows nothing and Eddie has become so selfish. And Maggie says that you don't even realize that she's taking all your money to get her turkey teeth. Then Maggie echoes her father and tells Eddie that you have a sharper mind and it's really disappointing. And you can see that Eddie's really hurt with what Maggie's saying. And then the hostess comes out and says that they can't be yelling in the middle of the restaurant. Eddie says that they're leaving. And then Eddie tells Maggie that she does not want her in her life anymore. And that was the conversation I think that they were supposed to be having because she's toxic. And then, of course, Maggie's in shock. And after that whole awful interaction, her manipulative father says that he's very proud of her. So Maggie and her father they go to coat check, they're getting their coats, and the lady that was in that restaurant that Maggie kept saying that she keeps staring at them, the lady passes by them and the father kind of does a double take with the lady, and then the lady turns around and she approaches them. And she tells her father, which her father's name is Mark, she says that she never thought she would see him again. And she said that she was 20 years old and your wife was a lovely woman. She says she didn't know what she was doing. She says she didn't talk to the journalist woman when she called her. She said she wouldn't talk about him even though the other women had, just so you know. And then she storms out. And Maggie was there for that whole interaction. And Maggie was like, what was that about? And, Mark says, well, the reporter's going to do an expose about him. So basically, he's getting exposed because apparently there has been, I guess, in the past, maybe some sexual assaults. It seems like that he may have had with students, or I'm not sure, but there were some sexual assaults that happened in the past. So basically, they're about to do an expose, a story about him, and they're about to expose him and I guess some sexual assaults or affairs that he's had in the past. And she says he's about to get canceled and you want to portray yourself as a lovely family man. She says some things that does insinuate that he's an alcoholic and he's brutally honest when it suits him. She tells him that she does not like him and that she's medicated. And after that, he walks out without a word. And then the hostess does comfort her. Will calls Maggie, and Maggie tells him that she's going to steer this ship now. And she tells him to bring all his nerdy stuff to her apartment, and they're going big. And there's a nice interaction with the host. Like I said, she was comforting her, and there's a nice little interaction between her and Maggie. And that's the end of episode 4. That's a pretty meaty episode. We found out a lot in that episode, and yeah, it's a good episode. Episode 5 is called Furlongs. And let's see what furlongs means. Is a measure of distance in imperial units and United States customary units equal to 1/8 of a mile. So this is according to Wikipedia. So it's equivalent to any 600 feet, 220 yards, 40 rods, or perches. 10 chains, or approximately 201 meters. It's mostly confined to horse racing. So Cubbits, they were moving closer. Furlongs, it was like we're kind of spreading apart more. And now obviously it is because, if my theory is correct, it is because Eddie and Maggie, last episode, Eddie told Maggie that she does not want her a part of her life anymore. So now they're distancing again. So this episode, Furlongs, this is Operation get Eddie back. This is like a sting operation that Maggie sets up to expose Whitney to Eddie. Now, remember last episode, at the end of last episode, Maggie told Will that she's steering the ship now. This is what she steered it into, a sting operation, essentially. So I'm not going to go too much into this episode because there's a lot of moving parts in it, but the moral of this episode is Whitney does get exposed, which is great. Will is the one, because Will was doing all the research. Okay, Will was doing it all, and Will comes out and says that her real name is Catherine. Whitney's real name is Catherine, and her father actually is alive. Whitney has been creating online personas to scam people for several years, which is wild. We find out that Whitney has actually spent Eddie's money and that she gave her. And you can tell Eddie's just overwhelmed. She's shocked, feels very overwhelmed, and she's upset as to why they told her that way. So at this moment, it's Crent, Maggie's mother, Will, Maggie, and the 2 friends from the bridesmaids. They're all there, and Eddie's like just confronting all of them because Whitney leaves after she got exposed, obviously. Um, but she's mad that they told her in that way, in the manner that they did, and she's upset. And Maggie's like, "Hey, let's talk. Let's both of us talk, just you and me. And Eddie says she doesn't want to be where they're at right now. And she's okay, we can go somewhere else. And then we cut to them standing outside of Eddie's old bar. And it's closed. And they together kick the door open. And that's the conclusion of episode 5. So we have episode 6, which is titled Poppy Seeds. So poppy seeds are tiny. So now we're moving back together again, if my theory is correct. And this is the last episode of the season. This is episode 6, and so it is a flashback episode. I hate flashback episodes. I cannot stand them. But I actually, when I watched this the second time through, I actually enjoyed this episode. I thought it was very sweet. The episode opens with, it shows how Eddie and Maggie first met. And so we see that interaction, but then we cut back to present day and they're talking, reminiscing, and Maggie says that they were destined to meet. And Eddie says, why? Because you were at my dad's wake. And you made me laugh at my dad's wake. The episode opens with Maggie coming into Eddie's bar, but they're in the middle of Eddie's father's wake. So that's their initial meeting. And Eddie tells Maggie that Whitney says that you deflect with jokes and you avoid telling, to avoid telling the real things or dealing with the real thing. And Maggie says that she doesn't really try to avoid real things. It's just survival for her instead of sitting in misery. So, her bipolar disorder, she's just like, instead of being depressed, I just laugh about things. And Maggie knows that she's not textbook supportive, but she does support Eddie. And then Eddie gets upset with Maggie, and Eddie's like, because you keep bringing up the good times and not bringing up the bad times. So Eddie says that she's been working hard. It's Eddie tells Maggie that it's really hard being her friend. And then she flashes to Maggie having a low moment. And I don't know if it's the first time she's ever experienced her having a low, but it flashes back to Maggie having a low, like in a low mood and very snappy, very snippy. And, Maggie didn't know Eddie didn't really know where it came from. So, yeah. Then Eddie tells Maggie that she just doesn't get it. We're back to present day. Sorry, guys, I'm just looking at my notes, so I will make sure that I just tell this correctly. But Maggie says she has never had to look after anyone or be responsible for anyone. And then Eddie challenges Maggie and asks her when there was a time that she had to look out for Eddie. And Maggie can't really think of a time. The stories that she comes up with and then the stories that Maggie says or that she tries to come up with, Eddie's like, those aren't true. And Eddie says, you always do this. You try to change the narrative. Then Maggie tells Eddie very calmly. She says her memory is messed up because of the lithium poisoning. She cannot remember a lot of things over the years. And she apologizes to Eddie. And she tells her that she knows that it's hard to be her friend. And she said that she did not have the tools back then. And she's very sorry. She did not have the tools to be a supportive friend for Eddie. So Maggie brings up a moment with Eddie when she won Bar of the Year. And it looks like a really fun night. And from the flashback, but then back to present day, Eddie was like, yeah, that wasn't a fun time. And then it cuts to, I think, Maggie just was really sick and an ambulance ended up coming. And it was because Maggie says it was because that was the first time her taking that medication. She wasn't supposed to drink. And Eddie says she doesn't get to be angry. She can't, like, Eddie can't be angry at Maggie because she has bipolar disorder. And she felt like she had to bury her feelings. And then Eddie says that moment was about her father, like her winning Bar of the Year. That was about her father, not. But obviously, with that happening, it turned into a whole situation with Maggie. And Eddie tells Maggie that there's always a reason that she can never show up for her. So Eddie and Maggie discussed, like, one of the last scenes of the last season, the previous season, where Maggie was supposed to show up for Eddie's abortion and she didn't. Um, we flash back and it shows Will comforting Maggie. And Maggie thought it was her mother, but Eddie tells her it wasn't, and it was Will. Then Maggie's like, "How do you know that?" And Eddie tells her, "Well, because Will called me and told me while I was at the airport what happened." And Maggie is upset. She's like, "So you were just going to leave me after you knew I was poisoned? You just left me?" And Maggie's like, "I missed your abortion because I was poisoned. I was poisoned and you abandoned me." Eddie says that she did not. And she says she had to go because she lost everything. And when you do think about it, her father has passed away. She lost the bar. I forgot why. Forgive me. Apologies. Anyway, she lost the bar. Um, Maggie's not being there for her. It's a lot. It's a lot. So that was like when, one of the last pieces of her father. So it was a lot. That was a lot for her. I can understand what happened. But Eddie finally breaks down and she says she had to go because she's weak. And so she just starts crying and crying and just has like a breakdown moment with Maggie. And Eddie says that she had so weak she said Eddie in the midst of her crying, Eddie says that she was so weak that she had to find someone to tell her how to think. Eddie says she knows she's not solved, but she is. She tells Maggie that her sad looks different than hers. And she said it still hurts. And she just breaks down even more and starts crying. And she said that she's a mess and she's a fraud and a loser. And then tells Maggie that she can't help her. And she's just crying and crying and crying. Then we have a flashback moment and when they first met. And while Maggie's leaving, Eddie tells her that she thought it was going to be a sad day, but or the worst day of her life, but it wasn't. And she thinks she has Maggie to thank for that. And then we cut back to present time. And Eddie is apologizing to Maggie while she's crying. And this is a moment where Maggie is really being there for Eddie. She's showing up for Eddie. And then Maggie tells Eddie to get behind the bar, and she does. And they're kind of recreating the first moment that they met. And Eddie asks Maggie if they just start over. And Maggie says, no, what's done is done. But they do love each other. And they're going to be there for one another. And they're going to move on together. And then Eddie asks if she can move in with Maggie. And obviously, Maggie's like, yes. Eddie asks Maggie if everything will be okay. And Eddie tells Maggie that she's all she has. And then Maggie says that she has her. And then they walk out of the bar hand in hand. And that is the end of season 2. So, like I said before, I hate flashback episodes. I hate them. But I actually, when I watched this episode the second time around, I really liked it and I thought it was very sweet. And it's actually a moment, Eddie's very vulnerable, very sad. Finally, we kind of get to see her breaking down. And yeah. And so, anyway, and then this is actually one of the this whole season, Maggie is trying to be there for Eddie. And she was a few times this season, but ultimately, this last episode, this is the ultimate, like, she has been there for her. She's picking up her pieces. She is broken right now. She is going to save her, essentially, or show up for her. And um the little bit of time that Maggie was there for Eddie this season was extremely frustrating. It was just like little like dumb stuff. Like, I don't want to say dumb because that sounds harsh, but it was just like irritating. Like her accidentally taking like the night medication. I'm like, girl, and then her mess up the wig thing. Like, she tries, but then she just fumbles. So that's really frustrating. So I don't know if that was the idea, excuse me, for us to kind of feel like, Eddie's frustration. Where like the audience is feeling the frustration that Eddie may have with Maggie, and being her friend. But anyway, so yeah. So and also with this second season, the way it concluded, I was like, is there going to be a third season? Because honestly, they could cut the second season. I mean, I would enjoy a third season, but I don't know what the third season will bring. So we're just gonna, I guess, just show real life again. Maggie's stable and hopefully she stays stable. And, Eddie's going to get back on her feet. So I don't know what they're going to do with the third season. Let me look it up actually. Okay, so as of now, they said there's no confirmation of season three. But yeah, like I said, I don't know. I mean, they could end it here if they wanted to, but hopefully not. It's a sweet show. It's a cute show. It was 6 episodes. It's a quick watch. Yeah, but I enjoyed this season. There's a lot, like I said, a lot going on, and thankfully, Maggie's through in her stable girl era, as she said. So that was nice. And yeah, so that is it for Big Moon season 2. Please let me know your thoughts in comments. Excuse me. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Please like this video. And yes, I'll be back with more videos. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm trying to wrap this up and I'm trying to figure out if there is something else I want to say about this season. Um, yeah, I think that's it. Anyway, guys, I will see y'all next time. Be safe out there and please stop by next time when I post my next video. But thanks for stopping by today. I really appreciate you. Like I said, I love your comments from my last Big Mood video for season 1. So thank you so much again. And I will see you next time, guys. Bye.